Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode I speak with Dawn Baumann Brunke, animal communicator and author of several books, including Dreaming with Polar Bears and Awakening the Ancient Power of Snake. Dawn discusses dreams, dreaming with animals, and shapeshifting in the dreamscape. She also talks about living with snakes and discovering their personalities, learning from animal teachers, being open to expanded states of awareness and consciousness, and the common message that animals have for humanity, our collective need to wake up. Dawn Baumann Brunke is an author, animal communicator, and dream enthusiast who lives in Alaska. She has led workshops in animal communication and offered animal consultations for over 20 years. She also designed a tarot deck and offers tarot readings. Her many books include Animal Voices, Animal Guides, Shapeshifting with Our Animal Companions, Animal Teachings, The Animal Wisdom Tarot, The Key to Spirit Animals, Dreaming with Polar Bears, and Awakening the Ancient Power of Snake, and an upcoming book about shadow animals. Dawn, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Hey, thanks for having me. And just listening to it, I'm like, wow, I have a lot of books about animals, huh?
You do, but that's amazing. And I love the approach that you take. I wanted to say that, the snake book kind of jumped out at me. And that was what led me to contact you. And I've since read Dreaming with Polar Bears. And I love your writing style. I love the approach that you take with these. And I want to read your other books now as well. And I know several people who would be very interested in your work if they aren't already familiar with it.
Well, thanks. Yeah,
of course.
Thank you.
So I thought that we would begin with dreams.
Yes.
Both the books that I read begin with dreams. You describe yourself as a dream enthusiast. Can you speak a bit about your interest in dreaming and perhaps your dream practice?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I am a dream enthusiast. In fact, a number of my books, not just those two, started with dreams or inspired by dreams. And I think I've always had just a really rich dream life. I mean, even as a young child, I remember dreams from kindergarten and even before then. I've always just been so fascinated. And I remember asking my mom, why don't we talk about dreams? Like, I couldn't believe that people weren't more interested in these amazing stories that go on during the night, right? And as I grew up, I really came to honor my dreams and was so grateful for some of the insights that dreams provided and the inspiration, later with writing my book. So yeah, I've always been interested in dreams. I've experienced a lot of different types of dreams, lucid dreams, dreams that kind of go in and out. And I also include waking dreams as part of my dream life, because I think sometimes in life we have these experiences that are very dreamlike, and when we start to use the dream framework or protocol to start to learn what these things are, they speak to us in the same way. They can offer the same insights and inspiration and answers, meaningful answers that we're looking for. So that's kind of the background of dreams for me. And I've always kept a dream journal. To me, that's fascinating. So you asked about, how my dreaming life works. One of the things I do is always write down my dreams in the morning. I just feel like that's so important. It's a way of bringing this story into the waking world, right? We're making it physical by writing it down. And I found dream journals to be really invaluable because you have a record then. And actually in that Dreaming with Polar Bear books, I talk about how I went through my dream journals because I was looking at bears, and I found a series of dreams from numerous years back that had gone on for 7 or 8 years, and they were all connected. And when I looked at him in that way, I saw an evolution of consciousness. And I thought, isn't that fascinating, right? So I think a dream journal is really a helpful thing for all of us to keep and to consult, and to help us. I think it also helps us establish a better relationship with our dream self, if you will. It says, I'm paying attention, and I'm finding this valuable. So
all right.
there you go.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to speak with a fellow dreamer. I agree with you that dreams are so crucially important. And, we spend, a third of our lives asleep and a good chunk of that dreaming. So
Right.
why not pay
Right.
attention to it?
Why not?
I wanted to ask you this because we have a little bit of a similar background in a way. I noticed that you studied comparative religion in college.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if choosing that major was influenced by your experience and interest with dreams.
Wow, that's a really good question. No one's ever asked that before. Huh. My gut feeling is yes, at some level, because I remember going to college. I was going to be a psych major. I thought that was fascinating, right? And then when I took my first psychology class, I'm like, not my fave, right? So I did a student design major. And what I actually did is I put together comparative religions and symbolic anthropology. In other words, not archaeology, but how different cultures use symbols specifically to talk about religion or the divine. So that was my fascination. And maybe that is dream related at some level, because religions and rituals, they're all types of stories or mythologies. They're all types of stories. They're all types of dreams we tell ourselves, individually and collectively, in order to better understand the world and our relationship with spirit, right? So yeah. Wow, what a great insight you had. Thank you.
Well, of course, it was one of the things that I think influenced me to get into religious studies. I was very influenced by Carl Jung, reading Jung, and that led to the symbolism and mythologies and everything. But it was dreams for me. So when I saw that, and having read your book, I thought, I wonder if there's the same thing going on here.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about a dream language and symbology and Jung, and I mean, all of these things, a mythology, they all come together. They all have this common denominator. Yeah, I really like that insight. Yeah.
You said that you keep a dream journal. How long have you been keeping a dream journal? Because I know that in Dreaming for Polar Bears, you do go back quite a ways looking at former dreams.
Yeah, I think since I was about 10.
Wow. And you still have all of those?
I do. I have a huge stack of dream journals, on my shelf behind me, actually. And I try to, along the way, record dreams that I remembered when I was real young, because I can remember dreams from about 2 years old or so.
Wow.
Just a few, but they were significant. So I wanted to pull them in. And
And that was one that in the Polar Bear book, maybe we'll start with this. I was going to start with the snake book, but since we're talking about dreams, and both of them begin with dreams. Mm-hmm. But in the Polar Bear book, that starts with a dream, and you go back to, I think it's the earliest dream that you remember.
About the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or one of the earliest dreams that you remember.
Yeah, about going down into a basement. My parents leaving me at this house. Well, I go with my parents. The short version of the dream, I go with my parents to this house, some neighbors, and they want to do, have their drinks or whatever. And so the lady says, "Oh, our dog is down in the basement. You can go with her." So I go down in this basement, and there's this huge white dog there, and it has several puppies. And I lay down with the dog and the puppies, and I'm just, so happy. And when my parents come to get me, I say, I want to stay with the dogs. Right? My mother swears this did not happen. But what kind of a mother would let her daughter go down in a basement with some dogs? No, Dawn, that did not happen. But it was a significant dream for me. I think it speaks to my love of animals and of connecting with animals and of sharing that dream state, because that's what we did in that dream. Is I went down to the basement and kind of slept with these dogs, and we shared a sense of, community. right? That type of communion. So yeah.
I think that it's fascinating. I love how you bring in the dream state in terms of communicating with other animals.
Mhm.
And that's such a huge part of the dreaming with polar bears,
Mhm.
that in one dream, you become lucid in the dream, and then you recognize that, and you're just walking with a polar bear.
Yeah.
And you realize that the bear is also dreaming, but also lucid in the dream.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a really special dream for me. And you're right. That's what I called those sea dreams. I had these dreams early, and it was just this walking in the high Arctic beside a polar bear. And oftentimes in the dream, I would know that this had happened before, but then I would forget. And so again, it was this series of dreams. And at one point, and it was very much about movement, which is interesting because I talked to a woman who talks about movement and how that was so significant, even as a child. Do you remember the dream I had about walking in my, opening up the closet, and there's a bear inside, and we walk around my room. So walking with the bears, which is something polar bears do, they're very much about that movement. But in this particular dream you're talking about, yeah, so I turn my head and I see the polar bear, and it's almost as if I'm inside the polar bear's head looking at me. And I realize the polar bear is in my head looking at me. And there's this realization that we're both lucid, that we're both real, or, have physical bodies, and we're seeing each other in this joined dream. And that's a little bit about what dreaming with polar bears is about. It's about the joining of dreams in some cases, and connecting in that way, connecting with different aspects of consciousness, and what that brings us. So yeah, it's some out there stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's good. And I was going to ask you this question, since you just brought up consciousness, and this is a little bit of I suppose, a philosophical question. You are working, I think, with a different model of consciousness than what most people, think about, where, it's not just humans that are conscious, and it's not just humans that are intelligent either.
Yeah.
You work with a kind of an expanded consciousness. So I wanted to ask you, how do you understand consciousness? And I know that's a big loaded question.
That is a big loaded question. And I'm really always hesitant to kind of put it in a box,
Yeah.
because then we're already not really dealing with what we're dealing with. So I guess, one of the ways I think about consciousness is as a spectrum.
Mm.
And, I think everyday ordinary consciousness, what most people would agree on, it's very sad, and it doesn't really take into account that other animals have thoughts or ideas. I mean, maybe we pay it lip service a little, but that was one of the things when I first opened up to animal communication and realized, wow, I can connect with the thoughts of another animal. I mean, how wild is that? And it did take me a little while to kind of ground that in my body, because it was just so different than what I had thought reality was. But I think you're right. I think what it is it's an expansion. So it's how wide on the spectrum, can you be? And it's not even a spectrum. It's more like a interdimensional, 5-dimensional type thing, right? But yeah, it's and another way I explain it very simply is, what radio channel are you dialed to? Because we can focus in on one thing, you and I right now, and then my dog starts barking about the moose outside, and it's something completely else. So we're constantly kind of modulating our energy, our frequency to focus in, and sometimes we can get very expansive, right? I mean, we've all had situations like that where we just are utterly amazed by something, the ocean, sunset, whatever it is. It's just, it opens us, and we realize, oh, I'm this too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that this is where your work is really important. And I'm curious about the communicating with animals, because again, humans, we have this tendency to think that we're the only ones. But, we have pets, and I think often it's that we're talking to the pet, not really listening to what the pet has to say.
We're not talking with it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite things, I've got cats. I always have cats.
Oh, wow.
And I love when, they're getting pet, for example. And if I stop, they just kind of reach out and tap me. And that is them communicating very clearly.
Right.
I'm not done yet.
Yeah,
I'm not done yet.
exactly.
So I wanted to ask about this communicating with other animals and what you might call it. It seems that it is grounded in maybe like a kind of empathy. Would you consider it a more of a kind of a telepathic, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, again, I've sort of been doing this so long that I don't even think about it that way. I just kind of, what I do is open.
Mm.
So I'm connecting, like, let's say if, if I'm doing a talk with a woman and a cat, or a person and their cat, I'm focused on the cat, I'm focused on the woman, I'm bringing all of our energies together to help solve the situation. So that's a very practical aspect of communicating with animals. At other times, like when you're outside or when I'm with my dog, I think it's what I would call it is deepening into communion, the communion within communication. So
Mm.
it's this deepening into sharing energies, sharing thoughts, feelings, ideas. I think we can have very intense communications with animals without words. It's just, and yet sometimes we can have words. I mean, in the polar bear book, sometimes I would wake up from a dream and these kind of spirit bears would just download information and help me type it out, which I was so grateful for, because it happens really quickly. You have a chapter done and you're like, oh my gosh. But it really is like that sometimes we're animals, whether they're in body or not, can be sharing big downloads of information, and if we're open to that, to receive that, then we can get it down on paper or on the computer and share it with others. So I guess my answer is there's so many different ways of this. And it's as open as we are creative, right? You know, and I think everybody gets it in a different way. Sometimes I do animal communication classes, and I'm a writer, so I tend to get things with words, right? But not everybody does. Some people get it with feelings. Some people will or they'll get this big gestalt of things. I had one woman, she got songs. That's how she would get her communication. She would hear this singing, she would hear lines from songs or different things. So it's just, that's her unique, format in her brain of how she interprets this information. So it's all open to us. Again, how open are you willing to be?
Yeah, there's a lot I want to ask about. But with that, I think I want to go into the snake book a little bit,
Mhm.
because what you just said brings up a lot to me. And I wanted to share with you, I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. My experience that led me to purchase Awakening the Ancient Power of Snake the second I saw it.
Oh,
No, literally, I did. I am one of those people that never liked snakes. I hated snakes.
mhm.
I like other animals, but I always thought, you know what? If you kill a snake, that's fine. Kill them all. I don't care. But I had never really had that much experience with snakes. Very vague memory of a babysitter, a friend's babysitter, mowing one once, running over
Mhm.
one with the lawnmower. I just didn't like them. And when I lived in Colorado, I know that there were rattlesnakes, but I never encountered one. And after I moved to Pasadena here in California, I decided I wanted to get a sense of place. I wanted to get to know the area that I live in. So I started hiking every week. And I started at a different trail than the one I hike at now. And the very first time I went, you can go two-way. You park, and then if you go down, you can go to a waterfall, or you can kind of go up the mountain. And so the first time I was going down to the waterfall, and I'm about halfway there, and this couple approaches me, and they're like, "Oh, be careful! There's a rattlesnake up ahead." And I completely froze.
Mhm.
And I don't know what was going through my head, but I guess I was imagining that this snake was just lying in wait to bite me.
Right.
And I even considered just going back up to the car and leaving. But I didn't. I went, and the snake was gone. But on that trail, eventually I learned it was just riddled with rattlesnakes.
Mhm.
And I always stopped and I froze, and it was a problem. It was a problem. It was like taking away the joy for me.
Mhm.
I was complaining about this during a break in class, and a student told me, "Oh, we'll just go to this other trail," which is actually the other end of the trail I'd been hiking on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, and they said, "There's no snakes." So I went, and there weren't any snakes, and I was happy. So I just started hiking this trail. But there were snakes. In Southern California, there were snakes.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I've seen king snakes, garter snakes, and rattlesnakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to learn the ways of rattlesnakes a little bit. And I remember one day I was almost done. I was the last part of the trail was all pavement. And there was a snake on the other side. It was far enough away that I just didn't care. I just kind of kept going. But then I heard this commotion behind me, and there was this guy on his bicycle, and he had gotten off the bike, and he was chasing the rattlesnake into the brush with the front wheel of his bike. And I remember thinking at that time, I'm like, just leave it alone.
Yeah.
It's not bothering you.
Yeah.
And that woke something up in me, because it was the very first time I felt empathy for a snake, for a rattlesnake.
Yeah.
And last summer, every time I went to the trail, I encountered rattlesnakes. Every single time. This year, though, I haven't seen them at all. Maybe once or twice, little baby ones. And I found myself missing them. And I started thinking, what's going on here? I've had this total change of perspective, and I started thinking about snake. I started thinking about the symbolism of snake. And I was in a bookstore, and I saw your book, and I'm like, I have to buy this book. So I apologize taking away all this time from you.
No, I love that story.
Yeah, I felt compelled to share it with you.
Yeah. And isn't that like a dream story in a way?
Yeah.
It comes to us and it's showing us something, and well, I'm just curious, what were your feelings then when you did see the snakes in the latter part of the story? Were you still afraid of them, or?
I wasn't so much afraid of them. I mean, there's always caution, they're rattlesnakes. You need to be cautious. What I've discovered is that they're always sort of on the side. I would come across them often. They would be crossing the trail. And I learned that, originally years ago, I never tried to harm them. I would throw like small rocks near them to try to get them to move, and it would never work. And what I learned is that, what they're all saying eyes, that if I just step back, even like just 3 or 4 steps, they would then, it seemed, understand that I meant them no harm, and that I was giving them the space to go across the trail.
Yeah.
And so that's what I learned. And I've also learned that they're shy. That they don't.
Some really are. Yeah. Some are very shy.
They're shy, and they're considerate. I think.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Nice thing to say about a snake. Yeah. Well, and there's so many different types of snakes. Let's just take that into account. And, rattlesnakes are one. But it also reminds me of a dream that I did have in that snake book that I share, because I do think snakes, when we open to like, what can I learn from this animal? They are testing us in some ways too. And I mean, I'm not warm and friendly with every snake. We're right to be cautious. There's like 3,500 species of snakes, about 600 are venomous. So you want to be careful. And I do remember this one dream I had where I go to kind of a little cabin in the woods, and this woman has all these snakes, right, in little compartments. And she gives me one. It's a big, like boa type snake, a great big one, right? And she says, oh, you can go sit over there. So I go sit on this lounge, and the snake is kind of going around my body, right? And then it comes to my neck, and I go, no. And then the snake went on, right? And when I woke up, I felt this kind of exhilaration, like that was a test, because we have to stand in our own, personal power, right? And to be clear about our boundaries, you don't necessarily want to go sit down next to a rattlesnake and pet it. No, I don't want a big boa around my neck. No. So, but I think what that speaks to is, on deeper levels, is respect of self and respect of the animal. And I think snake is one of those animal teachers that requires respect not only of itself, but of its student, or it's the person it's talking to, the partner, right? When we're learning, I think that's so important. So yeah, there's a right way to do that, and then there's bullying it with a tire of a bicycle wheel. So
Yeah, and I would say respect is probably the main lesson I learned. To respect the snake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ourselves, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's for sure.
It's both. Yeah.
Yeah. So the snake book began with what you refer to as a big dream, and it was a healing dream for you.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could maybe say a few words about that. And I also want to ask you about some of the symbolism of snake. And I know that there's a lot to it.
There is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole book's worth.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, so the dream that I had, and I'm just going to tell the short version of it, because it really was kind of a big dream, not only in that it was an expansive dream, but a big dream, meaning that it was a very significant dream. I had this back issue. It was a winter solstice, which is kind of interesting. And I had this back issue. My back was it was going into spasm. I was in the bedroom, kind of in the dark. My daughter and husband were in the other room. And I was just really exhausted from these spasms that were coming. It's really, I don't know if you ever had back pain, but that's bad stuff. So at one point I just said, what do I need to know? And immediately I got this visual of this huge snake. It was so big that it really filled my whole frame of, visual reference, this very archetypal, angular, ancient, powerful snake. And I knew at some level, I know this is important, pay attention. At another level, I'm thinking this could be dangerous. But the words that I'm thinking when I see this is, how can I help you? Which afterwards I thought, well, that was really interesting. How can I help you? And the snake tells me it has lost its tail. And that morphs kind of into this dream. At this point, when this was happening, I was just more in pain. I wasn't in a dream, right? But when the snake tells me it's lost its tail, I kind of go into this little dream where I'm in a cottage, again, in the woods with this older woman, and we both have snakes on our laps. We're on chairs, and we're sewing the snake back together. The snake has literally lost its tail, and we're sewing the snake back together. And then I kind of come out of that dream, and now again, I'm kind of in waking consciousness, and the snake is this little silvery, kind of gray blue snake that's sitting in my lap. And I'm instantly thinking of Kundalini, the sleeping serpent, this energy, this Eastern, they talk about in the East, of this energy that comes up and awakens your chakras, your spine up to the crown chakra. And I say to the snake, is that what you are? And the snake basically is sharing this movie almost, kind of a panorama of everything that snake is. Snake is a creator deity. It's showing me really old, almost like old pictures of being with gods and goddesses and healing and being a guardian, and then kind of also showing me the more modern version of snake as on ambulances, a snake associated with healing, and but snake also denigrated. Snake as, we call somebody a snake, and it's a derogatory comment. So anyway, it was all this stuff, stuff about snakes. And when I woke up in the morning, I really did feel totally transformed. I didn't have the pain anymore. Oh, yay. But more than that, I knew that I was very excited because I knew that this was a huge dream. It had activated something. And so I wrote the dream down right away. And one of the things I asked myself was, why did that snake tell you it had lost its tail? Like that was kind of alluded to in the beginning of the dream. The tail was separated from it. And when I was writing that down, I'm aware that sometimes dreams speak to us in little codes, symbols, metaphors, double entendres. So I'm thinking maybe it meant snake has lost its tail, T-A-L-E, its story, the larger story of who it really was. And that made sense to me because the snake was showing me its story throughout the ages, its story with humanity throughout the ages. And so that really kind of was what, inspired me to write a book about snakes, really, literal, metaphorical, as a healer, as an agent of transformation, as an animal that was originally worshipped and honored, as an advisor, and venerated, to one that's become kind of shunned and feared and despised in some ways by some people. So again, it was a big dream because it's talking about the big story of Snake and how Snake connects with humans. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to me that evolutionarily speaking, I always have a hard time with some of these words, that we've been with snakes for a long time. Snakes have been part of the evolutionary process.
Yeah. I mean, I think snakes, they show up in some of our earliest myths, because that's one of the things that I first did was I went to my big Joseph Campbell book, kind of world myths, right? And I'm looking up snakes, and snake appears really early on. In Africa, there's this immense snake that creates the world, the stars and the worlds with its 7,000 coils, and in Mesoamerica, it kind of oversees, the creation of nature and humans. And in India, we have this wonderful 10,000 headed snake called Ananta that, it unfurls its body and time, and the creation begins. So we do have these really ancient stories about snakes, and as snakes being creator deities, really, and as oftentimes even birthing humans, bringing humans into being. So. Yeah. Very potent. Huh?
Yeah. And, I cover snakes a little bit in some of my religious studies courses. I always try to incorporate, sometimes I refer to it as the great goddess tradition. Yeah. And, there are snakes, there's a snake associated with the divine feminine.
Right. Right. I think that's really important to note, too, is that not only is snake associated with some of these, Hindu gods, but with the goddess, with Shakti, with a lot of, and you see this also in, in later, even in Greek mythology, that snake is associated with the goddess. And we see it in the Garden of Eden story, where snake is associated with the goddess Eve, or that aspect of the feminine, and that whole story shows us how then a lot of the myths that originally venerated snake are shifted into snake being a monster, something that must be killed, that must be, that's a demon, that's a tempter, that's a deceiver, et cetera, et cetera. So we actually see that historical shift if you look at mythology and history and kind of weave that all together. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I find it quite fascinating. And
I do too.
I don't remember if you mentioned this in the snake book, but, because of the story of the Garden of Eden, I think snakes in the Western world do get a short shrift. And that's where the connection with, evil and whatnot comes in. But there's a Gnostic text that tells the story of Eden from the perspective of the snake.
Oh,
are you familiar with that?
No, but I got to read it now.
Yeah. I forget the title. I'll email it to you.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
Add it to the end comments on the discussion. But it is connected to the idea of snake and knowledge. And, the Gnostics were about knowledge and waking up. And that's what the serpent was doing. And the Gnostics, according to this tale, they saw the serpent as the first incarnation of the Christ spirit, to point out to, wake up, wake up.
Yeah, because that's what the snake is doing in the story. Is it's saying, you're not going to die. God tells, Adam and Eve, you're going to die if you eat this fruit. And the snake's like, you're not going to die. You're going to awaken. Okay, who's telling the truth here? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally fascinating. Very fascinating. So you also write in the book that you ended up living with two snakes for a while.
Yes.
Carl and Chloe.
Carl and Chloe. Yeah.
What did you learn about snakes by living with them?
Wow. So much. So much. Number one, they have such different personalities. Carl was like kind of a grumpy old man snake. He really wanted to be left alone. I originally chose Carl because I thought he was more my speed. He was just kind of, I thought, okay, I can deal with that. Chloe, she was a corn snake, beautiful, orange colored. She was, like the 60s wild child. She just wanted to see everything. She had fast movement. She was very friendly, incredibly friendly, and just was curious about everything. So I definitely saw just in those two snakes, they have, I mean, they're different species, yes, but I think even people will tell you with ball pythons, there's a lot of different personality. So there is this individual, spirited personality in each snake. Snakes, I learned about time because snakes definitely experience a different time than we do. They eat, both of those snakes eat once a week. Some snakes actually eat once a year. So they have this different time. They would go into this when they were ready to shed. They would get very, their colors would get very pale. Sometimes their eyes would pale over, and they wouldn't want to be touched. They wouldn't want to do anything. And then they would release that. And then all of a sudden they'd be new, and they'd be, this new shiny skin, and it would just be a different thing. So I learned so many different little things about that. I will say the shadow area for me was about feeding them mice. I did have a really hard time with that. And so there is a chapter, I think, in the book about that, about, what that means and how, as snake guardians, how do we do that? Or if you live with snakes. So yeah, I'm not completely 100% settled with that yet, but that's okay. That's right. We all have our little areas that we're still working with. But so they taught me about that. They taught me to ask some hard questions of myself deep down, and to really look at things that maybe bothered me a little bit and ask, why is that? And kind of to face my fears. I think that's one of the things that snakes do is they say, let's go to that part that's a little dark or a little shady. Why do you feel uncomfortable? What is that about? I mean, they weren't saying that to me directly, but by my experiences, that's where I was led to look at that. So, yeah.
I was wondering about this fear aspect, because it seems to be unconscious for most people. I don't think that the majority of people have had a real negative experience with a snake. And you provided some statistics in the book where more people are killed by dogs than
Who
snakes,
knew, right? That's in the US. Let's just clarify.
Yeah,
That's in the US, because in places like India, where you have a lot of snakes that are wild, it's different numbers. But in the US, I think there's like 5 people killed a year by snakes. And I think is it 20 or 25 by dogs?
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't think of that, right?
Right. Well, I was wondering where the fear may be coming from. You mentioned there's a shadow aspect, and I want to get your take, and then I'll run something by you.
Okay. So there's a couple theories. Some people say, that it has to do with our ancestors, and we have this kind of ancestral energy of being fearful of snakes because, venomous snakes, you should run. And maybe that's true to some extent. My take on it is maybe more spiritual aspect, which is that snake guards a very potent energy. We talked before about Kundalini. It's the energy of awakening. And I think snake as an animal teacher forces us to look at our fears, to stand in that spot. And, on the one hand, that's why snakes are so fearful. And when you see the raised head and the cobra, that's the scary snake, because it's saying, can you face your fear? Because if you can't, then you shouldn't go into Kundalini. There's some energies we shouldn't go into because they are dangerous for us. But if you can face that fear, if you can face snake and face your own fears, then snake becomes a guardian. Then snake becomes an activator and a guide and a mentor. And then we can open that Kundalini. So I think there's this aspect of snake, which is both, like preventing us and being very scary, and yet being a guide and a mentor. And it's really about us. Where are we in relation to that? So I think the fear of snake is at some level of very deep fear of our own power, of our own ability to awaken, because that is probably a dangerous thing. And historically, we've gone through that, where that has been shut down, and the powers that be don't want you to awaken. They don't want you to question the mainstream narrative, kind of going through that today. So there's a lot of censorship. And whenever there's a lot of censorship, there's something that is wanting us not to look at our own power and not to awaken. So I think that's exactly why snake is so powerful. And I think, and one of the things I say in the book often is like, snake comes in times of transformation. So it's really challenging us. Are you ready to do it this time? Are you ready to wake up?
And that I think is very close to what I was thinking about, because I was thinking that there's something, with archetypes, there's always something sort of numinous about them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a bit of fear involved
Yeah.
in the encounter with the numinous.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking that may be one of the places that the fear arises from.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree with you. There's something archetypal and there's something so deep inside of us that's connected to snake that well, again, I think it goes with that whole, the fear of awakening, the fear of
mhm.
knowing who we really are,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, on the one hand, it can be fearful, but on the other hand, it can be so exciting to wake up to that. Are we ready? It's always the
Yeah.
question with snake that I feel, are you ready?
Mm,
You
mm.
know? Mm.
Well, and now I'm going to jump back to the polar bears because
Sure.
the polar bear council. You had mentioned that you started dreaming about this group of polar bears, and they say something similar to you. I think there is, and I'll quote here from the book, and this is the Polar Bear Council speaking to you, that from our perspective, humans are at the top of the endangered species list. And they describe us as a species lost in sleepwalking illusion.
Mm.
That the snake brought me to that.
Yeah.
And not dreaming as we know it, but a sickness that leads to a loss of balance and spirit.
Yeah. Oh, just touches my heart, huh? I feel
Yeah.
like that's where we are. That's where we have been in the last couple of years. There's this, there's a lot of sleeping sickness
Mhm.
occurring. And again, snake speaks to that. I'm thank you for reminding that about polar bears. I think and polar bears are in some ways similar to snake in that they're a big animal. They have a big animal energy and they request us to step into our power and to stop pretending, to stop sleeping, to really wake up to things and be who we need to be on the planet, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. And a
Yeah.
lot of different animals have told me that humans are the ones who are in danger. We worried about the whales and all this, but you know what? Here's the mirror, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of that speaks to me very much because I personally see the many ecological crises that we are facing right now in spiritual terms, that
Mm-hmm.
it speaks to a kind of spiritual sickness on the
Yeah.
part, or spiritual disease, dis-ease on
Yeah.
our part.
Yeah.
So did the bears have any other guidance for how humans can wake from this sleepwalking illusion? How can we heal our spirit?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think almost paradoxically, in one way, is they're telling us to dream and to pay attention to our dreams and to start bringing up the wisdom from our dreams. So many people I still meet today, they're like, "Oh, I just had this crazy dream," and they kind of want to throw it away. And I'm always kind of being a little taskmaster, saying, "Hey, maybe it has something to tell you, right? Let's look at it, right?" You have to talk kind of funny with them, but to bring that up because, Nick, I think it's doing the work. Are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to sit with and look at, what's uncomfortable in yourself? Are you willing to look at your fears? Are you willing to look at, why do I get angry about this? Why do I get sad about this? And really kind of sit with our emotions and move through them so that we can be clearer. Because, our society, well, maybe globally, but here in the West especially, we're like masters of diversion, right? Masters of diversion. It's the government's fault. It's this, it's that. We're like master projectors. Everything is everybody else's fault. And we fail to sit with ourselves and take responsibility for who we are and what we're doing. And wouldn't it be awesome if you had classes in grade school, even in high school, on how to sit with your emotions and how to kind of, learn more about who we are rather than reciting rote facts. We got Google, right? We can look it up.
Right.
To sit with
Yeah.
your emotions and to really look at what makes us uncomfortable. How can we move through that? How can we listen to people who have different opinions and not, start ranting on Facebook, right? We're just, don't get me started.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, I think I agree with all of that. And I know our time is limited. So I'm not going to start ranting about our current education system, although I could. But it also seems that not just to sit with ourselves and to pay attention to our dreams, but to sit in the places that we live and to pay attention to the other animals that we share space with.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yes, of course. Yeah, I so agree with that. Yeah. And we can learn so much from that,
Mhm.
because when you do that and when you get down to that deeper sense of communion, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
just helps all of that anger and diversion and stuff fall away, and you realize, oh, what was I ranting about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mentioned, I hike every Friday, and I always tell people that's my spiritual practice. I just have to go. And it's been an interesting experience. I've been doing it for about 12 years now,
Mm,
and learning the animals that I do share this space with.
mhm.
And I noticed a pretty profound shift in think. I mean, not just with snakes, but, it's like August for me became, well, this is the time that the deer come to town.
Mm,
Because
mhm.
that's when I would start seeing them. And July is, when the honeybees gather.
Mm, mhm.
And so I started seeing everything in connection with other life forms.
Yeah,
Uh, I haven't tried
yeah.
to communicate with them so much yet.
Yeah, I think that's great. And then we open up even further. We connect with the land and the trees and the plants and
Mhm.
all of that. Is all of that is
Yeah,
connected. But
yeah,
don't you think when you're operating from that place, when you're hiking or when you're dreaming or when you're communing, you're just at this much larger expansiveness or space of who you really are. And we do I feel the connection,
yeah,
with everyone
yeah,
and everything.
absolutely.
And I think, man, again, that would be a great class for
Yeah,
kids, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. There are a few who are doing things like this,
There
but they
are.
are
There
they,
are.
they are few and far between, though, unfortunately. So you had mentioned in our conversation, I think, and it's also in the book, the Dreaming with Polar Bears, that it's not just snake, it's not just polar bears, but animals all over the world are working with groups of humans,
Yeah.
kind of creating this. I think you refer to it as a bridge of consciousness,
Yeah.
and
Oh, that's a nice phrase. I like that. Yeah.
that's your phrase.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, yeah, I like that.
um, so I was just wondering, have you heard from other people who've had similar experiences as you did with the polar bears? And if
Yeah. I mean,
so,
there's definitely people. In fact, I just got an email today of a group of people who are working with whales.
ah,
So that's their focus, and they're, bringing up different teachings. And I'm sure there are. I can't give you really specifics right now. I'd have to look at it, but I know there's groups of people working with different animals, sometimes groups of animals. Sometimes they're, like a little bit more, we might call them spirit animals. So, working in collective ways to bring more and more of this energetic to our collective awakening, especially for humans.
yeah,
It's not really the animals that need to be woken up, it's the human animals.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So would you say that that's a sort of consistency in the message that we need to wake up?
I would. I would. I remember way back when I wrote my first book, Animal Voices, and I remember a group of animals saying, "Oh, we call you the surface people," and they weren't making fun. They were just saying, and I'm thinking at first, "Oh, that's because we walk on the surface of the planet," and they're like, "No, no, no, no. It's because you walk on the surface of your consciousness. It's because you have a very thin spectrum." They're not saying this then, but this is my interpretation. You have a very thin spectrum of what you're awake to, and yeah. There's so
Yeah.
much more depth. There's so much more expansiveness. We can do it any direction you want to do, but it's yeah. So definitely, the answer to your question, I think there are a lot of animal groups that are bridging with humans to bring this awareness more up, and we can each also do it ourselves, right? You can tap into that anytime. That's the beauty of this, isn't it? It's free. You can do it anytime. You don't need a secret pill or a this or a that. You can just do it anytime you want. All you do is go sit outside, connect to the earth, feel your connection, and open up. And you can talk with whoever or whatever you want. Mountains, clouds, the moose, the dog, the rocks, the plants.
There's an element to your work that is, I would interpret as sort of deeply shamanic. Speaking with the animals, you talk about shapeshifting. And you did this in the polar bear book. You described you put on, I think, a sort of a polar bear suit and then become the polar bear.
Yeah. In a dream.
In a dream, for sure. Yeah. And that's important to point out, that the shape shifting kind of happens in this context.
Yeah.
It made me think, I don't know if you're familiar, there was a philosopher, Thomas Nagel, who wrote a very influential article, I think it was probably back in the 70s or so, called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?"
Oh.
And he essentially, what he was arguing is that, he was arguing against that we could ever know what bat consciousness is or what human consciousness is simply by looking at brains.
Oh, yeah.
Especially because bats perceive the world in such a radically different way.
Yeah.
But I think at the same time, he would also suggest that we can never know bat consciousness because it's so different than our consciousness. And I remember thinking several years ago that, I bet a shaman would have something else to say about that. And then when I was reading your work, I thought, I bet Dawn would have something to say about all of that.
Well, yeah. Can we ever really know exactly what it's like to be a bat without being a bat? I don't know. But can we share consciousness enough to get a sense of what it's like? I would say yes. I remember having a really odd little experience. I was out walking in the mountains with my family, and for some reason, we were all taking different trails, kind of, or, we're in the same general area, but we were just exploring. There was a lake nearby, and I looked up and there was an eagle, and I thought, I wonder what would it be like to be an eagle? I mean, it was just such a fleeting thought. And all of a sudden, my consciousness was up in the eagle looking down. And I was so surprised because it was a different way of seeing the world. I mean, I was seeing it through different eyes. It wasn't like I was really just seeing it from above. I was seeing it telescopically. It was just a different quality of seeing it. And that excited me so much. I went right back into my body. But that was a clue to me of, there are ways of sharing consciousness with different animals and understanding the world through their perspective. And that's one thing in the polar bear book. There's a part where one of the polar bears wants to know what's it like to be a human. And wants to kind of come into my world and see it from that perspective. So, which is also really interesting, isn't it? So we become a human ambassador and we kind of share our world with polar bears and I think there'd be other animals who'd be interested in that too. I mean, I've been asked by a couple different animals, well, how do you see the world? How do you see that? It's just such odd things that make you startle. Like for example, I remember talking with some birds, and this is just so odd, but I was there's a big bush outside my window here, and the bird came there, and I was just connecting with it. And I was aware that I had to get ready to go to a restaurant with my husband. And so I'm kind of thinking that in my background, right? And the bird is like, wait, you let other people give you seed? Like, the bird was just horrified that we would get our food from somebody else. That was just like just the oddest thing in the world. Like, oh my gosh, those humans, they're just so bizarre, right? But it really kind of, that's not something I would have imagined, right? So I'm saying we have these experiences that kind of kick us up into another level of perception and realizing we're not the only ones on the planet. Our way of seeing the world is not the only world. And what can we learn if we're willing to consider that? And start learning in different ways. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, and powerful, I think. Very
powerful. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one way that helps us to expand. The more we do
Mhm.
that, the more we kind of share consciousness with others.
Mhm.
To me, it's shape shifting is kind of in the sense of not necessarily becoming that animal physically, but shifting the shape of our consciousness, right? So we're shifting the shape of how we see the world and how we experience life. Yeah.
Yeah. And, that's something that we humans need to do is we need to reclaim not just the different perspectives of consciousness, but also imagination.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like little kids, right? They just do it
Sure.
naturally and they'll tell
Yeah.
you these amazing stories. And yeah, and you can go there with them,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I know that we are pretty much out of time, but I did have one question to ask you. One more. Is there a species that you would like to communicate with, but you haven't had the opportunity to do so yet?
Oh, that's really interesting. I don't I don't know that I have, because if I would think of that, what species would I like to communicate with? Then I would, I'm the type of person, I'm like, oh, well, what would be that like? Okay, I'm gonna do it, right? I'm gonna try to do it. I mean, these days, here's an interesting one. What's it like to communicate with a virus?
Mm,
you know there's a whole stories that unfold, and what would our world be like if we were willing to entertain that possibility and not be in such fear about things, but look at it from different perspectives.
mhm.
And then if you really want to get wild out there, you could, what's it like to communicate with, other world entities or other dimensional selves? And
Yeah.
so again, how imaginative and open and creative can you be? And there
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah. I have someone on the following podcast who is addressing that, did their doctoral work on entity encounters, I suppose,
Oh, wow. I'm gonna have to start.
non-physical consciousnesses.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to listen to your
Yes,
your
please.
stuff. That sounds really cool. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, I'm trying. I'm trying.
Yeah. Good for you.
My understanding is that the best way for listeners to find out about you and your work is through your website,
Yes.
www.animalvoices.net. That's right.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I will put a link to that in the show notes and
Okay.
also on the video description in YouTube. And I'll put links to your books as well.
Okay. Well,
At
thanks.
least
Yeah.
at least Snake and Polar Bear.
Yeah. 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 And you can go to my website and see my books. And there's chapters you can look at and excerpts and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Thanks.
I highly recommend the books. They're very very well written and thought provoking and fun to read too. So
Thanks. I always think about that as a writer. Like, what do I want to read? I want to read something a little fun, a little
yeah,
interesting,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, they were
It makes
certainly
me think.
interesting. Yeah, they were
Yeah.
certainly interesting. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Well, Dawn, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you and getting to know you a little bit.
Oh, same here. Totally. Very
Okay.
much.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. And that's a wrap on episode 14 of Rebel Spirit Radio. In our discussion, I mentioned a Gnostic text that tells the story of Eden from the perspective of the serpent. The title of that text is The Hypostasis of the Archons. The entire text is not from the perspective of the serpent, but the serpent was performing a very vital function in the story, telling Adam and Eve to wake up because they were being imprisoned by the demiurge and his archons. It's always those damn archons in the demiurge, isn't it? The ancient Gnostics are one of my favorite obsessions, so you can count on them reappearing in the podcast in the near future, and I hope I'll be able to devote entire episodes to them. That said, thank you for listening or watching if you're a part of my YouTube audience. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to give it a positive review on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. Your reviews really do help. And please consider subscribing. For those viewing on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you will be informed when I upload new content. For the time being, I'll be releasing episodes every other week with the goal of releasing them every week in the near future. I'm also working on creating additional video content for the YouTube channel, including book reviews, educational videos on topics concerning spirituality, the history of religion, and the religious response to the climate crisis. If you would like to support my work in creating free and credible material on YouTube, please consider making a one-time donation via PayPal. You can find a link for that in the video description or show notes. Your support makes this podcast possible. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nourish your rebel spirit.